Presented to you by David James Wolchko and Julio Martinez. Women were largely urged to take on male roles at jobs during war. Of course, those being Caucasian women. Women of color, were thought of secondly. And of course, recruiting women for factory jobs, largely by government-created propaganda campaigns centered on a figure known as Rosie the Riveter. 75% of women reported that they wanted to continue working after World War II. Women were laid off in large numbers to supply men coming back from war. Unions would ultimately charge less to people of color, really coming in to support everyone whole. Over 2.5 million African American men registered for the draft, and black women also volunteered in large numbers. Women could not hold high positions within the industry between the time of war. That was especially to suppress their capabilities. Women who were white would only be able to make it to the highest position available to them, being supervisors or managers, ultimately cutting women short of true potential. Colored employees would ultimately make less and hold mediocre positions, starting at the bottom of the working demand, if that. Employees would make up to $2 a day if they are lucky, and only up to $8 a week. Minority women also endured discrimination and dislocation during the years of war, which is why Eleanor Roosevelt urged her husband Franklin D. Roosevelt to approve the first U.S. government child care facility under the Community Filed Acts of 1942. Through the 1950s, there was, in many ways, a period of conformity with traditional gender roles. It was also a decade of change, when discontent with the status quo was emerging, where popular culture and the mass media reinforced messages about traditional gender roles. Consumer culture and the Cold War ideology of domesticity, with the reality of women's lives not always reflecting these ideals. African American women faced particular difficulties in the pursuit of post-war material abundance. In the American dream, popular portrayals of ideal femininity and home life ignored the lives of minority women and families. Moreover, the 1950s witnessed significant changes in patterns of sexual behavior, which would ultimately lead to the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Many areas of the social sciences and history are concerned with power, but hierarchies of power is structured in a way that focuses exclusively on mapping power structures in a systematic way, developing general theory of power. Unlike most fields of inquiry, it did not grow slowly or develop over time. It appeared all of a sudden, and with much fanfare between the years of 1953 and 1956, in widely read books by sociologists Floyd, Hunter, and C. Wright Mills, making intentions clear to construct an overall portrait of American society, which included the level they also called the high and the mighty and the high circles. Working class Americans, many of whom were thrown out of work by the Depression, were shocked and angered by the outstanding display of wealth throughout the hierarchies, flaunting their continued prosperity in the face of national-wide suffering. The Great Depression affected virtually every group of Americans. No group was hit harder than African Americans. However, by 1932, approximately half of black Americans were out of work. In some northern cities, whites called for blacks to be fired from any job as long as there were whites out of work. Racial violence again became more common, especially in the South. As well, discrimination continued to prosper in the New Deal housing and employment projects. President Roosevelt, for political reasons, did not back all the legislation favored by such groups as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. When the U.S. entered World War II, Labor leader A. Philip Randolph threatened to organize a march on Washington to protest job discrimination in the military and other defense-related activities. In such response, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802 stating that all persons regardless of race, creed, color, or national origin be allowed to participate fully in the defense of the United States. The American dream is an ideology in the United States in which freedom includes the possibility of prosperity and success to all, regardless of social class or race, and emphasizes a direct link between individual effort and success in an open, merited-based system, and attracts most people to this country in the first place. However, the American dream dramatically changed as the country's definition of success applied primarily to white middle-class men from the 1930s to the 1950s, creating a class structure fueled by discrimination. Class stratification in the United States changed dramatically between the 1940s and the 1960s. However, President Roosevelt's New Deal was an ideal way to help the country recover from Great Depression. Meanwhile, the National Housing Act helped white families establish homes in the suburbs outside of large cities and prosperity discriminated against blacks moving into their neighborhoods. Women began to realize their full potential, however, still fought to maintain their status positions when men returned home from war, and so forth, and really just established the movement ultimately for women. In the post-war years, the American dream of the nuclear family defined sexuality in a marginal context, leaving no place for single sexual culture, homosexuality, or any other type of sexuality not considered mainstream. In the Cold War era, human sexual desire of any deviation from the marginal norm would have been considered incorrect and dangerous to the strengthening of the American people for the protection of the free world, until Alfred Kinsey publication in the Kinsey Report and other works in mass media which brought the reality of American sexuality to light in the mid-1950s. Sexuality, then not in the line with supposed family values of the United States, was considered a significant problem apart from the norm of American sexuality, in which we live today.
And Ireland. Also, we have people from Central America, South America, and Mexico. Probably the first laborers were people from Africa, brought as slaves and worked as free laborers. People who owned the slave became very rich, taking advantage of this free labor. And since there were no laws to protect the slaves, owner would abuse the slaves and make them work long hours and as many days as possible. After the slaves became free, they worked as free laborers in many other places. And then some women were free as domestic laborers or domestic workers. Then we also have people from Asia. As the first Asians worked on the first railroads, the ones that connected California to the east of the United States. Then we started having factories. We have unions because they became stronger, and many places have now unions. But even though with unions, there's always been a difference when it comes to pay and the kind of work performed by people. There has always been an argument that white men makes more money than black men, and then black men make more money than white women, and then white women make more money than African Americans and Mexicans or Latinos. Mexico, South America, Latin America come to the United States looking for better opportunities, better jobs, but they end working on jobs that pay less and with less benefits. According to some researchers, the reason is because these minorities, when they come to the United States, they have less education, so their opportunities are very limited and in these kind of jobs.